We think it's best if you don't attend the baby shower. Your old-fashioned parenting advice might make my friends uncomfortable. Those cutting words from my daughter-in-law were still fresh when she called the day before the event, frantically asking if I could bake my famous cupcakes since their bakery order fell through. What she didn't know was that while quietly accepting her hurtful exclusion, I had been organizing an intergenerational wisdom circle for new mothers in my neighbor's spacious sunroom, a gathering that would transform not just our relationship, but the entire community's approach to supporting new parents. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. At 74, I had imagined my later years would be filled with the special joy of being a grandmother and passing down the knowledge I'd accumulated through decades of raising children and teaching family studies. After dedicating 38 years to supporting families as a pediatric nurse and later as a parent educator at Pinecrest Community Hospital, I looked forward to the unique relationship I could build with my own grandchild. Instead, I found myself navigating an unexpected family conflict that tested not only my relationship with my son, but my understanding of what it truly means to support new parents in today's rapidly changing world. My name is Margaret Collins. Throughout my career, I had become something of a fixture in our mid-sized coastal town of Harborview. 3 generations of families had received my care and guidance, first in the maternity ward and later through the parenting workshops I developed at the hospital. I couldn't visit the local farmers market without former patients, now adults, with children of their own, stopping to share updates or introduce their growing families. My approach had always balanced medical knowledge with practical wisdom, something parents appreciated even as parenting trends shifted dramatically over the decades. I still remember my first day at Pinecrest in 1978, wearing my crisp white uniform and sensible shoes, nervously walking into the maternity ward, where I would spend the next 20 years before transitioning to parent education. The hospital had been recently renovated, with large windows that allowed natural light to flood. The nursery, a progressive design choice for its time. The head nurse, a formidable woman named Gloria Patterson, had sized me up with experienced eyes before nodding approvingly. The technical skills you can learn, she had told me. What matters most is how you make new parents feel capable rather than overwhelmed. That's what they'll remember long after they've forgotten your name. It was advice that shaped my entire career. As medical practices evolved, from the strict feeding schedules of the 1970s to the on-demand approaches that followed, from fathers pacing in waiting rooms to becoming active birth partners, I adapted my guidance while maintaining my core belief that new parents needed both practical support and confidence-building encouragement. By the time I retired in 2016, I had helped welcome over 2,000 babies into the world and guided their parents through those crucial early weeks and months. The parenting education program I had developed had expanded to include classes on everything from breastfeeding to father's involvement to grandparents' evolving roles. The hospital administration had even named the Parent Resource Center after me, the Margaret Collins Family Support Center, a recognition that had brought tears to my eyes at the retirement ceremony. Margaret didn't just teach parents how to care for babies, Dr. Harrington, the hospital director, had said during the dedication. She taught them how to trust themselves while remaining open to new information. That balance is her true legacy. His words had captured exactly what I had tried to accomplish throughout my career. Not promoting rigid approaches from any era, but helping families develop confidence while continuing to learn and grow. This philosophy had guided not just my professional life, but my personal approach to family as well. My late husband Richard had been my steadfast supporter throughout my career. A high school science teacher with a gentle manner and endless patience, he understood my dedication to my work, even when it meant night shifts and weekend classes. We had raised our son David in a home where education was valued but never forced, where curiosity was encouraged, and where family traditions created a sense of stability and belonging. Richard and I had met during college when we both volunteered, at a community health clinic. His passion for making science accessible to his students perfectly complemented my interest in translating medical knowledge for new parents. Throughout our marriage, we would often discuss how best to communicate complex information in ways that empowered rather than intimidated people. His classroom demonstrations became legendary in our town, just as my hands-on parenting workshops gained recognition throughout the region. "People don't need more information," Richard would say. "They're drowning in information. What they need is wisdom about how to apply it to their unique situations." Richard had passed away 5 years ago after 46 years of marriage, a loss that still ached despite the passage of time. The garden he had lovingly tended now flourished under my care, a living reminder of his practical wisdom that growth requires both nurturing and allowing space for natural development. The hospital's annual science scholarship established in his name supported students pursuing healthcare careers, continuing his legacy of quiet, impactful education. Our modest craftsman-style home on Maple Street, with its wraparound porch where we had spent countless evenings discussing the day's events, now felt both comforting in its memories and occasionally too quiet in his absence. I had adapted to widowhood by deepening my community connections, volunteering at the hospital's family center, participating in the local gardening club Richard had helped establish, and maintaining close relationships with neighbors who had become like extended family over the decades. Our son David had grown into a thoughtful, ambitious man who balanced his father's scientific mind with my interest in human connections. As a child, he had been curious about everything, taking apart mechanical toys to understand their workings and questioning why babies in the hospital nursery responded to different soothing techniques. His science fair projects regularly advanced to state competitions, but he also showed remarkable empathy, organizing a buddy system for new students at his school and volunteering at the hospital's pediatric ward during his teen years. After completing medical school at the state university, he had chosen research over clinical practice, focusing on developing new treatments for childhood diseases. His work at Meridian Pharmaceuticals had recently earned him a significant promotion to research director, a role that made both Richard and me immensely proud. Though his career had taken him to the city about an hour's drive from Harborview, he had maintained regular contact, calling several times weekly and visiting at least twice a month until recently. When David met Julia 3 years ago at a medical conference in Chicago, their connection had been immediate. Julia, a pharmaceutical marketing executive with an MBA and a background in biology, shared David's drive and analytical approach to life. At 35, she was accomplished and confident, having risen rapidly in her field through what David described as brilliant strategic thinking and exceptional presentation skills. Their relationship had progressed with the efficiency that characterized both their professional lives, dating for precisely a year before becoming engaged, then marrying 6 months later. Their wedding at the Harborview Yacht Club, 18 months. Ago had been a beautiful blend of traditional and contemporary elements, a string quartet playing alongside a jazz ensemble, classic vows with personalized additions, my grandmother's pearl necklace adorning Julia's thoroughly modern gown. I had been touched when Julia accepted my offer of the family pearls, seeing it as a promising sign of her openness to integrating family traditions with her contemporary sensibilities. The reception had revealed the first hints of the cultural gap between Julia's urban professional circle and our Harborview community. Her friends, mostly high-achieving professionals from the pharmaceutical and medical industries, clustered together, their conversations focused on career advancements and travel experiences. Meanwhile, David's childhood friends and our longtime neighbors shared family updates and community news. The two groups mingled politely but rarely connected meaningfully, separated less by geography than by fundamentally different value systems. I had made genuine efforts to build a warm relationship with my daughter-in-law, recognizing that Julia came from a generation with different perspectives on family dynamics and gender roles. Raised by career-focused parents, her mother a corporate attorney, her father a university administrator, Julia approached marriage and family planning with the same strategic thinking she applied to her professional life. Her occasional comments about outdated parenting advice and modern evidence-based approaches sometimes stung, but I tried to listen with an open mind, acknowledging that childcare recommendations had indeed evolved significantly over the decades. "I appreciate your experience, Margaret," she had told me during one of our early conversations about family traditions. "But scientific understanding of child development has advanced dramatically. Some traditional practices have been shown to be counterproductive." Though delivered with a smile, her words carried a clear message about the limited relevance she placed on experiential wisdom compared to recent research findings. Still, I focused on building connection rather than defending my perspective, sharing stories about David's childhood that created bridges rather than barriers between us. Our relationship settled into a polite but somewhat distant pattern. During their visits to Harborview, Julia would engage in pleasant conversation about general topics, but tended to check her work emails whenever the discussion turned to family matters or community connections. When I visited their sleek downtown condominium with its minimalist decor and spectacular city views, I noticed how Julia subtly directed conversations toward professional achievements and away from more personal topics. David, caught between these two worlds, tried to facilitate connections with increasing awkwardness. "Mom has some fascinating insights about the historical shifts in parent education," he would offer. Or, "Julia just implemented an innovative marketing strategy for a new pediatric medication." These well-intentioned attempts to find common ground often fell flat, highlighting rather than bridging our different frames of reference. The news of Julia's pregnancy last fall had brought me profound joy. David had called on a Sunday evening, his voice bubbling with excitement I hadn't heard since his college graduation. "Mom, how do you feel about being called Grandma?" he had asked, barely containing himself. "I've been ready for that title since you finished medical school." I laughed, my heart swelling with happiness. "Are you telling me what I think you're telling me?" "Julia is pregnant," he confirmed. "Due in early summer. We wanted you to know right away, though we're keeping it quiet until after the first trimester." In that moment, all the small tensions in my relationship with Julia seemed insignificant compared to the miracle of new life that would connect us forever. I found myself offering silent thanks that I had prioritized building bridges rather than defending territory. That foundation would now serve this expanding family. The months that followed brought tentative connections to family traditions. During a weekend visit in their sleek downtown condo, Julia had asked about the baby quilt that had been passed down through generations of our family. "David mentioned a special quilt that you might still have?" she inquired over breakfast. "Something handmade for family babies?" I told her about the star pattern quilt that my grandmother had started. My mother had continued, and I had completed, with each woman adding squares for the children born in their generation. The quilt now contained 5 generations of family history, with stars representing births across more than a century. "That's actually quite meaningful," Julia admitted, her usual efficiency softening. "I like the idea of tangible connections across generations. Would you consider adding a star for our baby?" This unexpected interest in family tradition touched me deeply. I promised not only to add a star, but to teach her the simple quilting technique if she was interested, an offer she said she would consider after the baby's arrival. As the pregnancy progressed, Julia began showing more interest in my professional background. During a Sunday dinner in her second trimester, she asked thoughtful questions about the parenting classes I had developed. "David says your workshops were revolutionary for their time," she noted, "particularly your work on father involvement back when that wasn't widely emphasized." "We tried to meet families where they were," I explained, while gently encouraging practices that research and experience showed supported healthy development. Including fathers wasn't just progressive, it recognized reality. Children benefit from multiple secure attachments. That's consistent with current attachment theory. Julia nodded approvingly. I've been reading several recent studies on early bonding patterns. These conversations, though sometimes navigating careful territory between different generational approaches, seem to be building a foundation for a collaborative relationship as we prepared for the baby's arrival. When Julia mentioned planning a baby shower, I naturally assumed I would be involved in some capacity, perhaps helping with arrangements or traditional elements while she and her friends handled the contemporary aspects. My friend Zoe is a professional event planner, Julia explained during a video call in her 6th month. She's helping coordinate everything. We're thinking of a gender-neutral theme with a focus on sustainability. She showed me digital mood boards featuring muted greens and yellows, recycled paper decorations, and plant-based catering options. The sophisticated aesthetic reflected Julia's taste perfectly. Elegant, environmentally conscious, and thoroughly modern. That sounds lovely, I replied. Just let me know how I can help. I still have contact with many local families who would love to celebrate with you. I had envisioned perhaps contributing some homemade elements to complement the professional arrangements. Perhaps my signature cupcakes with natural food coloring that had become requested items at community celebrations, or the lavender sachets I made from flowers grown in Richard's garden that many local mothers use to help calm fussy babies. Julia's pause should have alerted me that something was amiss, but I attributed it to pregnancy fatigue or work distraction. About the guest list, she said finally. We're keeping it fairly intimate. Mostly my colleagues and friends from the city. We're planning it at the Loft downtown. The Loft was a trendy, industrial-style venue that hosted upscale events for young professionals, quite different from the home-based gatherings that had been tradition in our community. Still, I understood that this was their celebration to plan as they wished. Of course, I assured her. Whatever you prefer. I'm happy to attend however it's arranged. Another pause. Longer this time. Actually, Margaret, Julia said, her tone shifting to what I recognized as her professional voice. We've been thinking it might be best if this is just a gathering of my peer group. The shower will focus on the latest research-based approaches to infant care and development. Some of the discussions might contradict the advice you've provided over your career, and we wouldn't want to create any awkwardness. I waited for further explanation, struggling to process what appeared to be an exclusion from this important family milestone. It's not personal, she continued, apparently interpreting my silence as hurt rather than confusion. It's just that sometimes your comments about how things were done in your day come across as judgmental of modern approaches. My friends are very evidence-focused, and we want the shower to reflect current best practices without having to navigate intergenerational tensions. Her words stung particularly because they mischaracterized my approach so fundamentally. Throughout my career, I had been known for incorporating the latest research into my parent education programs. My occasional references to historical approaches were meant to provide context for how knowledge had evolved, not to advocate for outdated practices. But defending myself would likely only reinforce Julia's perception of me as resistant to contemporary thinking. I see, I managed to respond, my nurse's training helping me maintain composure despite my rising disappointment. I certainly wouldn't want to cause any tension at your celebration. I'm glad you understand, Julia replied, her voice brightening with apparent relief. We still value your experience, just in the appropriate context. Once the baby arrives, we'll certainly want your support, within the boundaries of our parenting choices, of course. The qualification was clear. My role would be strictly limited to what Julia and David deemed appropriate, regardless of my professional background or personal connection to my grandchild. It was a painful redefinition of the grandmother role I had anticipated with such joy. Of course, I said again, wanting to end the conversation before emotion overcame my composure. I should let you get back to work. Please give David my love. After we ended the call, I sat in my garden where Richard and I had spent countless evenings discussing family matters, seeking his wisdom even in his absence. The climbing roses he had planted along the trellis were just beginning to bud, promising the fragrant blooms that had always centered our outdoor gatherings. The stone bench where we had planned David's college applications, discussed my program expansions at the hospital, and later contemplated our retirement dreams, now held only me and the weight of my disappointment. The exclusion from Julia's baby shower stung more deeply than I wanted to admit, not just because I would miss the celebration, but because it represented a fundamental misunderstanding of who I was and what I could contribute. Throughout my career, I had continually updated my knowledge and approaches as research evolved. My value had never been in promoting rigid traditional methods, but in helping families integrate useful new information with practical wisdom. Being characterized as someone stuck in outdated thinking felt profoundly unfair, yet defending myself would likely only reinforce Julia's perception. I found myself wondering what Richard would have advised in this situation. His approach to conflicts had always been thoughtful rather than reactive, focusing on understanding underlying needs rather than surface disagreements. People who feel secure don't need to exclude others, he often said when discussing classroom dynamics. When someone builds walls, they're usually protecting something vulnerable. What vulnerability might Julia be protecting? Perhaps as a first-time mother facing the enormous transition to parenthood, she needed to feel completely in control of her environment and the information she received. Perhaps the shower represented not just a celebration, but an affirmation of her carefully researched approach to parenthood. Or perhaps, as someone who had achieved success through academic and professional credentials, she was uncomfortable with forms of knowledge that couldn't be quantified in studies and citations. As a spring shower passed over the garden, gently, nourishing the perennials Richard had planted years ago, I began to consider a different approach to this challenge, one that might bridge the generational divide Julia perceived without directly confronting her decision. What if, instead of focusing on my exclusion from the shower, I found a way to demonstrate the compatibility of experiential wisdom and evidence-based practice? The seed of an idea began to form as I recalled conversations with several younger mothers in my volunteer work at the hospital's family center. Many had expressed feeling overwhelmed by the conflicting advice they found online and in parenting books, yet hesitant to ask older relatives for guidance for fear of receiving outdated information. Meanwhile, many grandparents felt sidelined, despite having valuable insights that had evolved with the times. What if I created a space where these two groups could connect in a structured way that respected both current research and lived experience? Not a competitive alternative to Julia's shower, but a complementary gathering that might ultimately benefit her and other new parents by building bridges across the generational knowledge gap. As I considered this possibility, I remembered my neighbor Eleanor Thompson, a retired sociologist who had recently renovated her home to include a spacious sunroom she used for community gatherings. Eleanor had mentioned wanting to host more intergenerational events, believing that age segregation was diminishing the social fabric of our community. The more I thought about it, the more clearly the vision formed. Not a traditional baby shower, competing with Julia's modern celebration, but something entirely different that might ultimately create connection rather than division. A gathering that would honor both evidence-based knowledge and practical wisdom, creating dialogue rather than debate between generations of parents. Little did I know then how this moment of rejection would lead to something far more significant than simply attending a baby shower. Something that would not only transform my relationship with Julia, but create ripples of positive change throughout our community. The next morning, I called Eleanor to discuss my emerging idea. Her enthusiasm was immediate. "Margaret, this is exactly the kind of meaningful gathering I've been wanting to host," she said. "A space where different generations can share wisdom about parenting without anyone feeling judged or dismissed." We spent the next hour outlining what would become the first wisdom circle for new parents, a gathering designed not to replace traditional celebrations, but to create a new kind of supportive community across generational lines. As our plans took shape, I felt a growing sense of purpose replace my initial hurt. What had begun as a response to exclusion was evolving into something that might benefit many families beyond my own. Sometimes I reflected as rain continued to nourish Richard's garden, the most painful rejections can lead to the most unexpected new growth, if we're willing to plant different seeds rather than trying to force blooms in resistant soil. The following week was filled with purposeful activity as Eleanor and I developed our vision for the Wisdom Circle. Rather than dwelling on my hurt feelings about Julia's exclusion, I channeled my energy into creating something constructive that might ultimately benefit not just my family, but many others in our community. What if we approach this as a research-based initiative with experiential components? Eleanor suggested during our planning session at her dining room table. That way, it acknowledges both forms of knowledge as valuable. As a retired professor of sociology who had specialized in family systems, Eleanor brought academic credibility to our project. She pulled several recent journal articles from her extensive home library, pointing to findings about the benefits of intergenerational knowledge transfer in child-rearing practices. Recent studies actually support the value of what they're calling community parenting wisdom, she noted, showing me a highlighted passage. Researchers are finding that while medical advice should certainly be evidence-based, many practical parenting strategies benefit from accumulated experiential knowledge that hasn't been, and perhaps can't be, fully captured in controlled studies. That's been my observation throughout my career, I agreed. The best outcomes happen when parents can integrate current medical guidance with practical wisdom about the unique needs of their specific child. Together, we crafted a structure for the gathering that would respect both scientific knowledge and lived experience. We would invite both new and expectant parents from the community, along with experienced parents and grandparents who had demonstrated adaptability in their parenting approaches. Rather than a traditional shower format with games and gifts, we would organize themed conversation stations where participants could discuss specific aspects of early parenting, feeding, sleep, emotional development, partnership challenges, with facilitators knowledgeable in both current research and practical application. We should include local professionals as well, I suggested. Perhaps Dr. Layla Chen from the pediatric practice, and maybe Thomas Rivera, the family therapist who specializes in perinatal mental health. Excellent idea, Eleanor nodded. That acknowledges the importance of professional expertise while placing it in conversation with experiential knowledge rather than in opposition. As our plans took shape, I realized we needed to be clear about our intentions. This wasn't about creating competition with Julia's shower or proving her wrong in excluding me. It was about building bridges across a divide that affected many families in our community. We should schedule it for the weekend after Julia's shower, I decided. That way it's clearly not attempting to replace or compete with her celebration. Eleanor agreed, and we set the date for the following month, giving us adequate time to organize the gathering properly. We created a simple invitation emphasizing the intergenerational exchange of knowledge in a supportive, non-judgmental environment, being careful to frame it as a community initiative rather than a personal response to my situation. The next phase involved reaching out to potential participants. I contacted several young parents I had connected with through my volunteer work at the hospital's family center, explaining the concept and asking if they would find such a gathering valuable. Their responses were overwhelmingly positive. "That sounds amazing," said Mia Johnson, a first-time mother of a 2-month-old. "I have so many questions that don't fit neatly into my pediatrician visits, but I'm hesitant to ask my mom because her information is from the 80s. Something that bridges that gap would be incredibly helpful. I wish something like this had existed when we had our first," added Carlos Vega, father of 3 children under 6. We were drowning in contradictory advice from books and websites, but lacking practical wisdom from people who had actually been through it. These conversations affirmed that we were addressing a real need in our community. Meanwhile, Eleanor reached out to her network of retired professionals who had maintained connections to current practice in their fields. A retired lactation consultant, a former early childhood educator, a pediatric nurse who had recently retired from the community health clinic, all expressed enthusiasm about participating in a structure that valued their experience while acknowledging the evolution of best practices. Dr. Layla Chen's response was particularly encouraging. A pediatrician in her late 30s who had recently established her own family-centered practice, she immediately grasped the value of what we were creating. This is exactly the kind of community support network that research shows improves outcomes for new families, she said during our coffee meeting to discuss the concept. Clinical appointments can provide medical guidance, but parents need these richer community connections to develop confidence and practical skills. She offered not only to participate personally, but to help design informational materials that would accurately represent current medical consensus, while acknowledging areas where approaches continue to evolve. Her involvement added another layer of credibility to our initiative, ensuring that the wisdom shared would be both experientially rich and scientifically sound. In the midst of these preparations, David called to check in, unaware of the conversation between Julia and me regarding the shower. His casual mention of the event caused a momentary pang, but I had already moved beyond dwelling on the exclusion. "Shower favors," he said. She remembered you mentioning they were helpful for soothing babies, and she thought they would be perfect for the sustainability theme. This request illustrated the contradictory stance Julia had taken, excluding me from attending because my outdated perspectives might influence her friends, yet wanting to incorporate elements of my knowledge that fit her aesthetic. Rather than pointing out this inconsistency, I simply agreed to make the sachets. "Of course, I'd be happy to," I told David. "I'll harvest fresh lavender from the garden this weekend and have them ready by next week." "That's great, Mom. I know. She'll appreciate it, especially with how busy she's been with work right up to her maternity leave." I wondered briefly if I should mention the wisdom circle to David, but decided against it. Better to let our initiative develop organically rather than positioning it in relation to their shower. If it proved meaningful to the community, they would learn about it in due course. The following week, while carefully sewing 30 small sachets filled with dried lavender from Richard's garden, I reflected on how this project had already transformed my own perspective. What had begun as a response to personal hurt had evolved into something that addressed a genuine community need. Rather than focusing on what I had been excluded from, I was creating something new that might ultimately build more meaningful connections than a traditional shower ever could. 2 days before Julia's shower, David came by to pick up the completed sachets, exclaiming over the careful craftsmanship and delicate scent. "These are perfect, Mom. The natural linen and hand-embroidered initial on each one. Julia will love the artisanal look." He paused, seeming momentarily uncomfortable. "I know she's been a bit particular about the shower arrangements. I hope you understand it's just her way of managing anxiety about becoming a parent." "I do understand," I assured him, meaning it more genuinely than I had when first excluded. First pregnancies bring up all sorts of emotions and needs for control. The sachets come with no strings attached, just a small gift from grandmother to grandchild. David's visible relief confirmed that he had been aware of the tension but unsure how to address it. His next words surprised me. "After the baby comes, I'm hoping you'll be able to share more of your expertise with us," he said. Behind all her research and planning, Julia is terrified of making mistakes. Your confidence about adapting to baby's individual needs is exactly what she might need when theory meets reality. This insight into Julia's underlying fears softened my perspective further. Perhaps her rigid adherence to evidence-based approaches and rejection of experiential wisdom stemmed not from intellectual snobbery, but from deep anxiety about the unpredictable journey of parenthood. This realization reinforced the value of the bridge we were building through the wisdom circle, not to replace research with tradition, but to help parents integrate both sources of knowledge with confidence. The day of Julia's shower arrived. Sunny and mild, a perfect spring Saturday. I spent the morning in my garden, deadheading early blooms and turning soil for new plantings, my hands in the earth providing the same grounding comfort they always had during life's challenges. I thought briefly about the celebration happening across town at the loft, but without the sharp pain of exclusion I had initially felt. I had found my own path forward, one that honored my knowledge and experience while creating something potentially valuable for many families beyond my own. In the afternoon, Eleanor came by to finalize details for our gathering the following weekend. We had received RSVPs from 28 participants spanning ages from 23 to 81, expectant parents, new parents, experienced parents, grandparents, and professionals who worked with families. The format had evolved to include not just conversation stations, but also a collaborative resource-building activity, where participants would create a shared wisdom journal combining evidence-based information with practical tips for navigating early parenthood. What began as a response to exclusion has become something genuinely innovative, Eleanor observed as we reviewed the finalized plans. I've been thinking about how we might document this process. There's potential for a real contribution to understanding intergenerational knowledge transfer in parenting practices. Her academic perspective reminded me that personal challenges often connect to broader social patterns. The generational divide Julia and I had experienced wasn't unique to us, but reflected wider cultural shifts in how knowledge is valued and transmitted. By creating a structure that honored multiple forms of knowing, perhaps we were addressing not just a personal hurt, but a community need for more integrated approaches to supporting new families. Late that evening, my phone rang. Seeing Julia's name on the caller ID was unexpected, and I answered with some trepidation, wondering if something had happened at the shower. "Margaret," she began, her voice tense but controlled. "I hate to ask this last-minute favor, but we've had a disaster with the catering for tomorrow's brunch." The shower, it seemed, had been designed as a 2-day event, Saturday afternoon for games and gifts at the loft, followed by a Sunday brunch at Julia and David's condominium for the out-of-town guests. The catering company had just called to cancel due to a staff illness, leaving them without food for 20 people the next morning. "David mentioned your famous brunch recipes," Julia continued, the strain evident in her voice. "Is there any possibility you could help us put something together? We'd compensate you for all the ingredients and your time, of course." The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me, being excluded from the celebration, but called upon to save it from disaster. In my younger years, I might have felt vindicated by her predicament, or used the moment to point out the inconsistency of valuing my culinary experience while dismissing my parenting knowledge. But those reactions seemed petty now compared to the opportunity to respond with grace. "I'd be happy to help," I said simply. "Why don't I prepare my brunch quiches and fruit salad? They can be made ahead this evening and just need reheating tomorrow." The relief in Julia's voice was palpable. "That would be amazing. David says your quiches are legendary in the family." "They're actually your father-in-law's recipes," I told her. "Richard experimented with them for years until he perfected the balance of ingredients. I'm just the caretaker of his culinary legacy." This small reference to family tradition and the passing of knowledge between generations seemed to land differently than it might have before her shower. Instead of dismissing it as irrelevant sentimentality, Julia expressed genuine interest. "Didn't realize Richard was the cook in the family," she said. "David never mentioned that." "He was passionate about the science of cooking," I explained. "He approached recipes like chemistry experiments, testing variables until he achieved the perfect result. When you have the baby, I'll show you his handwritten recipe journal if you're interested. It includes notes on why certain techniques work better than others. Very evidence-based, actually." Julia laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound I had rarely heard from her. "That sounds like an approach I can appreciate. David definitely inherited that methodical mindset. Our conversation continued with practical arrangements for the food delivery, but something had shifted subtly in our interaction. The rigid boundary Julia had established seemed slightly more permeable, perhaps influenced by the reality of needing help despite her careful planning. It wasn't a dramatic breakthrough, but it created an opening that hadn't existed before. After we hung up, I spent the evening preparing 4 different varieties of quiche, each with detailed reheating instructions, along with a colorful fruit salad featuring Richard's special honey lime dressing. As I worked in my kitchen, preparing food that would nourish my son, daughter-in-law, and their friends, I reflected on how food had always been a way of building bridges across differences in our family. Richard had taught science concepts to David through cooking experiments. I had connected with patients through sharing simple recipes that even exhausted new parents could manage. Perhaps this culinary contribution, though not the participation I had originally hoped for, was its own form of wisdom sharing, a non-threatening way of demonstrating that traditional knowledge could complement contemporary approaches rather than contradict them. The quiches represented both Richard's scientific methodology and my practical experience, tradition and innovation working together rather than in opposition. The next morning, David came to pick up the food, his gratitude evident as he carefully loaded the dishes into his car. "You're a lifesaver, Mom," he said, giving me a warm hug. Julia was so stressed about the catering cancellation. "This means more than you know." "Happy to help," I replied. "Feeding people is one of the oldest forms of care we have. Give my best to Julia and your guests." As he drove away, I felt a quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with being right or proving a point. I had responded to exclusion not with resentment, but with generosity, not by demanding acknowledgement, but by offering support without conditions. Whether or not Julia ever recognized the contradiction in her approach to my knowledge, I had found my own path forward, one that honored both her autonomy as a new mother and my experience as someone who had supported countless families through this transition. The final preparations for the Wisdom Circle occupied the rest of my day. Eleanor and I transformed her sunroom into a welcoming space with comfortable seating arranged to facilitate conversation. We created simple but attractive information cards for each discussion station, combining key research findings with reflection, questions that would encourage sharing across generations. Dr. Chen had provided beautifully designed handouts, summarizing current pediatric guidelines while acknowledging areas where approaches continue to evolve. "We should document this model," Eleanor commented as we surveyed our completed preparations. "If it works as we hope, other communities might benefit from replicating it." Her words reminded me how far we had come from my initial hurt reaction to Julia's exclusion. What had begun as a personal response to rejection had evolved into something with potential value far beyond my individual circumstances, a model for bridging generational knowledge gaps in family support systems. That evening, I received an unexpected text message from Julia. "The quiches were a huge success. Everyone wanted your recipes. Thank you for saving our brunch. Would you be open to sharing the recipe journal sometime? Feeling more curious about family traditions lately." This small opening meant more than any dramatic reconciliation could have. It suggested that despite her initial rejection of traditional knowledge, Julia was beginning to recognize that different forms of wisdom might complement rather than contradict each other. Whether this shift had been influenced by conversations at her shower, the reality of impending parenthood, or simply the undeniable deliciousness of Richard's quiches didn't matter. What mattered was the potential for building connection rather than reinforcing division. I replied simply, "Happy to share the journal anytime. Richard would be pleased to know his recipes are still bringing people together." As I prepared for bed that night, I thought about how differently things had unfolded than I had initially feared when Julia excluded me from the shower. Instead of a family rift widening, small bridges were being built. Instead of dwelling on hurt, I had created something potentially meaningful for our entire community. And I had been reminded of a truth Richard often expressed. The most powerful response to rejection isn't argument or withdrawal. It's creating something new that demonstrates what was overlooked. The wisdom circle was exactly that. Not a competitive alternative to Julia's carefully curated shower, but a complementary approach that recognized the value of multiple forms of knowledge in supporting new families. Whether or not Julia ever participated in such a gathering, its very existence might help shift the narrative around intergenerational knowledge transfer in our community. With the gathering scheduled for the coming weekend, I felt a sense of anticipation entirely different from the hurt I had experienced when first excluded from Julia's shower. Something new was emerging from that rejection, something that might ultimately create more meaningful connections than a traditional celebration ever could. Little did I know that the wisdom circle would unfold in ways none of us had anticipated, creating unexpected pathways for healing, not just in my relationship with Julia, but in our broader community's approach to supporting new families across generations. My son's wife said I couldn't attend their baby shower, so I threw one next door with a twist. The morning of the Wisdom Circle dawned bright and clear, with spring sunshine filtering through Eleanor's expansive sunroom windows. We had arrived early to arrange the final details: comfortable seating and conversation clusters, information stations with research summaries and reflection questions, a refreshment table featuring both traditional family recipes and contemporary nutritional options. Each element had been carefully designed to honor multiple forms of knowing without prioritizing one over another. "It feels like we're creating a new kind of space," Eleanor observed as we surveyed our preparations. "Not quite an educational workshop, not quite a social gathering, but something that integrates both purposes." That integration was precisely our intention. The traditional separation between expert-led education and informal community support had created unnecessary divisions in family knowledge systems. Our goal was to demonstrate how these approaches could complement rather than compete with each other. As participants began to arrive, the diversity of our gathering became apparent. Young couples in their 20s with newborns or visible pregnancies chatted with silver-haired grandparents. Dr. Chen arrived with her organized materials, while Thomas Rivera, the family therapist, brought his warm presence and listening skills. Rose Mahoney, an 81-year-old former midwife who had delivered 3 generations of Harborview babies before her retirement, came bearing a journal of birth stories spanning 6 decades of practice. "I've been waiting for something like this," Rose told me as I welcomed her. "So much wisdom gets lost between generations now. In my day, we certainly had practices that needed updating, but we also had valuable knowledge that doesn't always make it into the research literature." After welcoming everyone, Eleanor and I explained the format. Participants were encouraged to move freely between conversation stations, contributing their questions, knowledge, and experiences in a spirit of mutual learning rather than debate. We emphasized that the goal wasn't to establish correct approaches, but to explore how different forms of knowledge might inform individual family choices. "Parenting has never been one size fits all," I noted in my introduction. "Our hope is that by bringing together research findings, professional expertise, and lived experience, we can support each family in finding approaches that work for their unique circumstances." The gathering quickly took on an organic energy as conversations developed at each station. At the infant feeding station, a young mother describing her struggles with breastfeeding found support from both Dr. Chen's medical perspective and Rose's practical suggestions developed through decades of supporting new mothers. "The research clearly shows the benefits of breastfeeding," Dr. Chen acknowledged, "but it also shows that maternal stress can affect milk production. Sometimes the most evidence-based approach is reducing pressure rather than pushing through difficulty." Rose nodded agreement. "In 60 years of practice, I've seen countless feeding approaches. What matters most isn't whether you're following the current recommendation perfectly. It's finding a way that nourishes both baby and mother, physically and emotionally. Their combined wisdom, one grounded in research, one in extensive experience, created a more nuanced and supportive conversation than either perspective alone could have provided. The young mother visibly relaxed as she realized she wasn't facing a binary choice between idealized standards and giving up, but could find a middle path supported by both science and practical wisdom. Similar dynamics unfolded at other stations. The sleep discussion integrated current pediatric guidance on safe sleep practices with grandparents' practical strategies for establishing sustainable routines. The emotional development conversation combined attachment theory research with diverse cultural approaches to nurturing secure bonds. Each discussion demonstrated how different forms of knowledge could enhance, rather than contradict each other when approached with mutual respect. About an hour into the gathering, an unexpected visitor arrived. David stood hesitantly at the door, surveying the animated conversations with evident curiosity. I excused myself from the discussion I was facilitating and went to greet him. "David, this is a surprise. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," he assured me. "Julia's resting. After all the shower activities, I was dropping off thank you notes at the post office and saw all the cars at Eleanor's. She mentioned you were organizing some kind of parenting discussion group." I explained the concept of the Wisdom Circle, careful to frame it as a community initiative rather than a response to exclusion from Julia's shower. "It's an experiment in bringing together different generations of parents to share knowledge," I told him. "We're exploring how research-based information and experiential wisdom can complement each other." David's expression shifted from polite interest to genuine curiosity as he observed the diverse participants engaged in animated conversations. "This looks fascinating, actually. Would it be all right if I joined for a while? With the baby coming so soon, I'm trying to absorb as much information as possible." "Of course," I replied, genuinely pleased by his interest. "Feel free to join any conversation that interests you." As I returned to my discussion group, I watched David gravitate toward the station focused on partner relationships during the transition to parenthood. Thomas Rivera was facilitating a conversation between several young couples and older parents about maintaining connection amid the demands of infant care. David listened intently, occasionally asking thoughtful questions that revealed his concerns about how parenthood might affect his relationship with Julia. "We've both been so focused on the practical preparations and Julia's birth plan," he mentioned. "But we haven't talked much about how our day-to-day relationship might change." An older father nodded in recognition. "That was my experience, too. We had the nursery perfectly prepared, but were completely unprepared for how exhaustion would affect our communication. Looking back, I wish we'd established some basic agreements about supporting each other before we were in the thick of it." This sparked a rich discussion about proactive strategies for partnership maintenance during early parenthood, integrating research on relationship challenges with lived experience from couples at various stages. I noticed David taking notes. On his phone, his expression thoughtful. As the afternoon progressed, our planned activities unfolded organically. The collaborative wisdom journal took shape as participants contributed insights across generations. Young parents added questions and concerns. Professionals provided evidence-based information. Experienced parents and grandparents shared practical strategies that had evolved with changing knowledge over time. "This is exactly what I needed," commented Aisha, an expectant first-time mother in her early 30s. "I've read so many conflicting things online that I was beginning to feel paralyzed by information. Hearing how different approaches have worked for different families gives me confidence that we'll find our own way." Her comment captured precisely what we had hoped to accomplish, not providing definitive answers, but creating a framework for integrating different forms of knowledge, with confidence rather than anxiety. By acknowledging both the value of current research and the wisdom of experience, we were helping new parents develop a more flexible, resilient approach to the inevitable challenges of caring for their unique children in real-world conditions. David continued moving between conversation stations, engaging thoughtfully with diverse perspectives. At one point, I overheard him discussing the challenges of balancing professional demands with family needs, a topic that would be particularly relevant given both his and Julia's high-pressure careers. Richard and I faced similar challenges. I contributed, joining their circle. He developed what he called the adaptive priority system, a way of regularly reassessing which aspects of work and family needed primary attention during different seasons of life. David looked surprised. Dad had a system for that? He always seemed to balance everything so naturally. The system was precisely why it appeared natural, I explained. He recognized that balance isn't a fixed state, but a continuous process of adjustment. When you were young, he deliberately scaled back certain research projects to be present for your developmental milestones. Later, when you became more independent, he expanded his professional commitments again. This glimpse into his father's intentional approach to work-family balance seemed to resonate deeply with David. "I wish I'd known to ask him about this before he passed," he said quietly. "That's exactly the kind of guidance I need right now." His journals contain a lot of his thinking on these topics, I told him. He documented his approach to most life challenges, always testing, adjusting, and recording what he learned. Those notebooks are yours whenever you'd like them. This moment of connection around Richard's legacy felt particularly meaningful, a tangible example of how knowledge passed between generations could provide practical support during life transitions. David had always admired his father's scientific mind, but perhaps had not fully appreciated the systematic way Richard had approached family life, as well as professional challenges. As the gathering began to wind down, participants exchanged contact information and made plans to continue certain conversations. Dr. Chen discussed establishing a regular evidence and experience discussion series at her practice, inspired by the productive dialogues she had observed. Thomas Rivera mentioned incorporating intergenerational perspectives into his parenting workshops. What had begun as my response to personal exclusion was evolving into sustainable community initiatives with potential long-term impact. David remained, until the end, helping Eleanor and me rearrange furniture and clean up refreshment areas. As we worked, he shared his impressions of the gathering. "This was really impressive, Mom," he said with genuine admiration. "The way you structured it to value different kinds of knowledge without creating hierarchies or debates, it's exactly the kind of balanced approach that's missing from so much parenting discussion." "That was our intention," I acknowledged. Eleanor and I both believed there was a need for spaces where research and experience could be in conversation rather than competition. David hesitated before continuing. "I know Julia's approach can seem dismissive of traditional knowledge sometimes. She's brilliant at analyzing research but less comfortable with forms of knowing that can't be quantified. It comes from her training and family background." "I understand that," I assured him, meaning it sincerely. Different professional disciplines cultivate different epistemological approaches, different ways of determining what counts as valid knowledge. It's not right or wrong, just different lenses for making sense of complex realities. He looked relieved at my understanding perspective. "Would you mind if I shared some of what I learned today with Julia? Not pressuring her to participate in anything, just some of the insights that seemed particularly helpful?" "Of course," I replied. "The whole purpose was to create shareable wisdom across different approaches. Take whatever seems useful for your specific circumstances." After David left, Eleanor and I sat in her kitchen, reflecting on the day's success while enjoying a well-deserved cup of tea. "That went even better than I anticipated," Eleanor remarked. "Especially the unexpected participation from your son. Do you think Julia might eventually be open to something like this?" "I'm not sure," I admitted. "But I've learned not to focus on specific outcomes. By creating something valuable without requiring her participation or approval, we've established a different kind of relationship, one based on parallel respect rather than agreement." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. That's a mature perspective. Not needing others to validate our approach frees us to continue developing it based on its own merits rather than as a reaction to rejection. Her observation captured exactly how my thinking had evolved through this process. What had begun as a hurt response to exclusion had developed into something with independent value, something that would continue to grow regardless of Julia's eventual involvement or continued distance. Over the following days, feedback from participants confirmed the Wisdom Circle's meaningful impact. Several young parents reported feeling more confident in navigating contradictory advice after hearing how experienced parents had adapted approaches over time. Grandparents expressed appreciation for the opportunity to contribute their knowledge, while updating their understanding of current recommendations. Professionals valued the practice-based insights that complemented their research-focused training. "We should definitely continue this in some form," Dr. Chen told me when she called to follow up. "I'm thinking about hosting similar gatherings at my practice quarterly. Would you be interested in helping develop a sustainable model?" This kind of institutional integration represented exactly the bridge building we had hoped to facilitate, connecting the medical establishment's evidence-based approach with community wisdom in structured, ongoing ways rather than as a one-time event. A week after the Wisdom Circle, I received a text message from David. Julia asked about the gathering I attended at Eleanor's. She's been having anxiety about how to handle contradictory parenting advice, wondering if you might have time for coffee this weekend to share more about your adaptive learning approach to parenting that you mentioned. This small opening felt significant, not because it represented a dramatic reconciliation, but because it suggested Julia was beginning to recognize limitations in her evidence-only approach as the reality of impending parenthood raised questions that research alone couldn't answer. By requesting information rather than my presence, she was maintaining boundaries while cautiously exploring additional resources. I suggested meeting at the Harborview coffee shop, a neutral location that would allow Julia to guide the level of personal connection she felt comfortable with. When Saturday arrived, I arrived early, selecting a quiet corner table where we could talk without being overheard. Julia arrived precisely on time, her advanced pregnancy now very visible as she carefully maneuvered between tables. "Thank you for meeting me," she began after ordering herbal tea. "David was quite impressed with your discussion group. He said you've developed a framework for integrating different types of parenting information without becoming overwhelmed." I explained the approach I had refined throughout my nursing and parent education career, a systematic method for evaluating both research findings and experiential wisdom based on their relevance to specific family circumstances rather than abstract authority. The challenge many new parents face isn't lack of information, I noted, but lack of context for interpreting that information. Research tells us what works generally across populations, but parenting happens specifically, with unique children in particular families. Julia listened with focused attention, occasionally asking clarifying questions that revealed her analytical mind. When I mentioned documentation systems for tracking individual baby patterns, her interest visibly intensified. "That's actually brilliant," she commented. "It's applying scientific method to individual observation rather than just implementing general findings. It creates a personalized evidence base." "Exactly," I confirmed. Richard and I found it extremely helpful with David. Richard created charts to track sleep patterns, feeding responses, and developmental milestones, allowing us to identify specific causes and effects in David's individual development rather than just following general guidelines. The mention of Richard's systematic approach clearly resonated with Julia's methodological preferences. David mentioned his father kept detailed journals. That kind of documentation would be extremely valuable to review. This opening allowed me to share more about Richard's approach to parenthood, his careful balance of scientific methodology with intuitive responsiveness, his documentation of observations without rigid adherence to expectations, his willingness to adjust theories based on real-world results rather than forcing reality to fit preconceptions. As our conversation continued, I noticed Julia gradually relaxing, her questions becoming more personal and less theoretical. Eventually, she revealed the underlying anxiety that had likely contributed to her earlier rejection of experiential wisdom. "I didn't have particularly attentive parenting myself," she admitted. "My parents were brilliant academics but somewhat detached caretakers. I'm determined to do better. But without positive models, I've been relying entirely on research. The problem is that research doesn't always provide clear answers for specific situations." This vulnerability helped me understand her perspective more fully. Without trusted experiential guides from her own background, Julia had understandably sought certainty in published studies and expert opinions. Her exclusion of traditional wisdom wasn't simply intellectual elitism, but a protective strategy for navigating the intimidating territory of parenthood without reliable familial models. "That makes perfect sense," I told her sincerely. "Each generation has to find its own path based on available resources. Research is an excellent foundation. I've always incorporated it into my practice. The question isn't whether to use research or experience, but how to integrate them effectively for your specific family circumstances." By affirming her research-based approach while suggesting complementary resources, I created space for connection, without judgment. Julia seemed to appreciate this validation, becoming increasingly candid about her fears of inadequacy despite extensive preparation. "Everything in my professional life has responded to thorough research and careful planning," she confessed. "But everyone keeps telling me babies don't follow plans. That's terrifying to someone with my personality." "That uncertainty is precisely why multiple knowledge sources are valuable," I suggested. "Research provides important boundaries and direction, while experiential wisdom offers adaptive strategies for the inevitable moments when reality diverges from expectations." As our conversation drew to a close, Julia surprised me with an unexpected invitation. "David and I are having a small dinner next weekend with our closest friends, the ones who will be part of our support system after the baby arrives. Would you be interested in joining us? Maybe you could share some of this adaptive approach with our friend group. Most of them are also first-time parents or expecting." This invitation represented a significant shift, from excluding me based on my presumed outdated knowledge to specifically requesting that knowledge in a context Julia controlled. It wasn't full reconciliation or unqualified acceptance, but it was a meaningful bridge across the divide that had separated us. "I'd be happy to join you," I replied simply, neither overemphasizing the significance of the invitation nor diminishing it. As we parted outside the coffee shop, Julia hesitated briefly before speaking again. "I should acknowledge that I probably misjudged the value of your experience. The shower was designed to focus exclusively on current research, but I'm realizing that approach has limitations. There's knowledge that comes from practice that can't be replicated in controlled studies." This acknowledgement, offered without dramatics but with genuine reflection, meant more than any elaborate apology could have. It represented not just personal reconciliation but a deeper recognition of the complementary value of different knowledge systems, precisely the integration our wisdom circle had been designed to facilitate. "We're all learning continuously," I responded. "That's actually the core of the adaptive approach. Remaining open to multiple sources of knowledge while developing your own expertise through direct experience with your unique child." Walking home from our meeting, I reflected on the unexpected journey from exclusion to reconnection. What had begun as a painful rejection had evolved into something far more meaningful than mere inclusion in a traditional baby shower could have provided. By responding to hurt with creativity rather than recrimination, I had not only preserved my relationship with Julia, but helped create new models for intergenerational knowledge sharing that would benefit many families beyond our own. The wisdom circle continued to develop in the following months, evolving from a one-time gathering into regular events hosted at various community locations. The model we had created, integrating research evidence with experiential wisdom in non-hierarchical conversation, proved valuable to many families navigating the complex territory of contemporary parenting. Meanwhile, my relationship with Julia found new footing based on mutual respect for different forms of knowledge rather than competition between them. When their daughter Eliza was born 3 weeks later, Julia's careful birth plan encountered the inevitable uncertainties of real labor. In that moment of vulnerability, she welcomed both medical expertise and the practical wisdom I could offer, from supporting countless families through similar transitions. "I finally understand what you meant about adaptive approaches," she told me in the quiet hours after Eliza's arrival, as we sat together in her hospital room. No amount of research could have prepared me for how this actually felt and what I would need in the moment. Holding my granddaughter while Julia rested, I reflected on how this precious new life had already created connections that transcended our previous divisions. The journey from exclusion to integration had transformed not just my relationship with Julia, but my understanding of how wisdom truly develops, not through rigid adherence to any single knowledge system, but through thoughtful integration of multiple ways of knowing in response to life's complex, beautiful realities. Sometimes I realized being excluded from where we expected to belong opens doorways to creating something new, something that ultimately serves deeper purposes than what we originally envisioned. By throwing a gathering next door with a twist, I hadn't just found an alternative to Julia's shower. I had helped establish a model for bridging generational knowledge that would support families far beyond our own immediate circle. That legacy, the Wisdom Circle and its ongoing evolution in our community, represented a far more meaningful contribution than any traditional grandmother role could have provided. By transforming rejection into creation, I had discovered a purpose that honored both my lifetime of experience and the evolving needs of new generations of parents finding their way. 3 years have passed since that painful phone call when Julia told me I wasn't welcome at her baby shower. Looking back now at 77, I can see how that moment of exclusion became the catalyst for something far more meaningful than I could have imagined. What began as a personal hurt transformed into a community initiative that has touched hundreds of lives and renewed intergenerational connections that might otherwise have remained broken. Eliza is now an active, curious toddler with her father's thoughtful eyes and her mother's determined spirit. Her relationship with me has developed in ways that beautifully reflect the integrated approach her parents eventually embraced, neither rigidly traditional nor entirely contemporary, but thoughtfully combining elements of both worlds to create something uniquely suited to their family. "Grandma, look what I made," she exclaimed yesterday, showing me a drawing of butterflies fluttering among flowers. "They're helping the garden grow, just like your stories help me grow." Her innocent observation captured exactly the essence of intergenerational wisdom, knowledge traveling across time, adapting to new circumstances while maintaining essential truths. This understanding of connection across generations has become the foundation of both our family relationship and the community initiative that emerged from my initial exclusion. The wisdom circle that began in Eleanor's sunroom has flourished beyond anyone's expectations. What started as a single gathering has expanded to a network of 15 community-based circles throughout our region, with inquiries coming from family support organizations in neighboring counties. The model we developed has been featured in local parenting magazines and discussed at regional public health conferences. Dr. Chen, who participated in our first gathering, now regularly refers new parents from her pediatric practice to the circles. "What I appreciate about this approach," she told me recently, "is that it doesn't pit scientific evidence against experiential wisdom. Instead, it creates a framework for integrating these knowledge systems in ways that benefit families facing real-world challenges." This morning, as I look around the community center where we're hosting our monthly gathering, I feel profound gratitude for the unexpected journey that brought us here. The room is filled with families of all configurations, engaged in thoughtful conversations across generational lines. David and Julia arrive with Eliza, who immediately runs to help Eleanor arrange the welcome table materials, taking her role as junior helper very seriously. My position as founding mentor of the Wisdom Circle network has become one of the most meaningful aspects of my later years, providing purpose and connection far beyond what I anticipated when Eleanor and I organized that first gathering. I've developed relationships with dozens of families, offering guidance that honors parents' primary role while providing consistent support through various stages of their children's development. What touches me most deeply, however, is how the initiative has transformed relationships within my own family. The careful bridges Julia, David, and I built in those early months have grown into sturdy pathways of mutual respect and collaboration. We still approach certain issues from different angles, but we've learned to navigate those differences with grace rather than tension. Two significant developments over these 3 years stand out as particularly meaningful in our family's evolution. The first occurred when Eliza was about 18 months old, during a family dinner at my home. Julia had been implementing a carefully researched approach to toddler nutrition based on the latest pediatric guidelines, but was growing increasingly frustrated by Eliza's sudden refusal to eat previously accepted foods. "Everything I've read suggests maintaining consistent offerings without pressure," she sighed as Eliza rejected the balanced meal prepared according to current recommendations. "But it's been 2 weeks of this, and I'm worried about her nutrient intake." When David went through a similar phase, I offered cautiously, we discovered that involvement in food preparation increased his willingness to try things. It wasn't in the parenting literature back then, but it worked remarkably well. Rather than dismissing this suggestion as outdated, Julia considered it thoughtfully. "That's interesting. It actually aligns with current research on autonomy development. Do you remember specific ways you implemented that approach?" This open question led to a productive collaboration. Julia researching the scientific basis for involving toddlers in meal preparation, while I shared practical strategies for making this manageable in real-life kitchens with real-life toddlers. Together, we created what Julia later called evidence-based traditional wisdom, approaches that honored both research findings and generational experience. When they established a weekend ritual of family cooking with Eliza standing on a safety stool at the counter, her food acceptance expanded dramatically. This success became a template for future challenges, not following either research or tradition exclusively, but thoughtfully integrating insights from both sources. "You know what I've realized?" Julia commented during one such cooking session. "Research often confirms what generations of parents discovered through trial and error. The difference is in understanding why something works, not just that it does." This synthesis represented exactly the bridge between knowledge systems that the Wisdom Circle had been designed to facilitate, recognition that different forms of understanding could enhance rather than contradict each other. The second significant development emerged when Eliza was 2, and Julia returned to work full-time after scaling back during the early years. The carefully constructed childcare arrangement they had researched and implemented collapsed suddenly when their nanny accepted a position closer to her own home. Faced with an immediate childcare crisis, Julia called me in a rare moment of undisguised panic. "Everything we had planned is falling apart," she explained, her usual composure absent. "All the recommended childcare centers have waiting lists. I have major presentations scheduled for the next 3 weeks that can't be postponed. David is in the middle of critical research trials. We're completely stuck." "I could help with Eliza, while you sort out a permanent solution," I offered, careful to frame this as a temporary bridge rather than a bid for the primary caregiving role. "My volunteer schedule at the hospital is flexible, and the Wisdom Circle coordination can be done in the evenings." Julia's relief was palpable. "Are you sure? It would be a significant commitment for at least a few weeks." "I'm sure," I confirmed. "Eliza and I already have our established routines from our regular time together. This would just be an extension of that relationship." What began as an emergency solution evolved into a more permanent arrangement than either of us had anticipated. After experiencing the benefits of having a loving grandparent as part of their childcare constellation, Julia and David proposed a structured role for me that would complement Eliza's eventual enrollment in a progressive preschool program. "We've been thinking about this carefully," Julia explained when they presented their proposal. "Current research actually supports the benefits of intergenerational caregiving when it's part of a consistent, developmentally appropriate structure. Would you consider being Eliza's caregiver 2 days a week on an ongoing basis?" This invitation represented a complete transformation from the early exclusion. Rather than seeing my traditional perspective as potentially harmful, Julia now valued it as an essential complement to the other learning environments they had created for Eliza. My role wasn't to replace contemporary approaches, but to provide the unique benefits that come from intergenerational connection. "I would be honored," I replied, genuinely moved by this evolution in our relationship. "And I'd be happy to coordinate with Eliza's preschool curriculum to ensure consistency in her learning experiences." The childcare arrangement that emerged from this conversation became a model we later incorporated into Wisdom Circle resources, a structured approach to intergenerational caregiving that honored both contemporary developmental science and traditional nurturing practices. Julia even co-authored an article with me for a parenting magazine, describing how their family had created an integrated care model that combined institutional early education with family-based intergenerational care. Beyond these family developments, the Wisdom Circle itself has evolved in ways I never anticipated when Eleanor and I first conceived it. What began as an alternative to a traditional baby shower has become a significant community initiative with multiple expressions. The original Circle format continues with monthly gatherings at locations throughout the region, providing ongoing intergenerational support for families with children of various ages. These groups maintain the core principle of integrating research-based information with experiential wisdom in non-hierarchical conversations. A more structured Wisdom Circle curriculum has been developed in partnership with the hospital's family education department, offering an 8-week series for new parents that deliberately integrates current pediatric guidance with practical wisdom from experienced parents and grandparents. Dr. Chen now serves as medical advisor for this program, ensuring that traditional practices are evaluated against current safety standards, while valuable experiential knowledge is preserved. An intergenerational mentoring program pairs first-time parents with wisdom partners from older generations, who have demonstrated adaptability in their parenting approaches. Unlike traditional mentoring that can sometimes impose outdated values, this structured relationship emphasizes mutual learning, younger parents sharing current research findings, while older partners offer context and practical strategies. The model has proven particularly valuable in bridging cultural differences in parenting approaches. Immigrant families find validation for traditional practices while gaining access to current medical guidance. Multi-generational American families discover ways to honor heritage while incorporating contemporary insights. By creating space for multiple knowledge systems rather than establishing hierarchies between them, the Wisdom Circle approach has helped reduce conflict while preserving valuable cultural wisdom. As the initiative's founding mentor, I've had the privilege of witnessing countless moments of connection across generational divides. Young parents who initially dismissed outdated advice, discovering valuable insights in traditional practices. Grandparents who resisted newfangled ideas, recognizing the benefits of evidence-based approaches. These moments of mutual recognition and respect embody exactly what Eleanor and I hoped to facilitate when we created the alternative to Julia's exclusionary shower. This morning's gathering highlights how far we've traveled from that initial hurt. Julia, now a vocal advocate for integrated approaches to family support, is facilitating a discussion on balancing professional research with community wisdom in developing family resources. David is sharing insights from his recent experience, implementing flexible work arrangements to support more engaged fatherhood. Eleanor is mentoring new facilitators, helping them create spaces where different knowledge systems can enrich rather than compete with each other. As the formal program concludes and families mingle over refreshments, Eliza approaches with her latest drawing, a colorful representation of what she calls her wisdom family. "See, Grandma?" she explains, pointing to the figures. "This is Mom with her research books, and Dad with his science things, and you with your special grandma knowledge. Together you make the best wisdom for helping me grow." Her innocent observation captures the essence of our family's journey. From competing knowledge systems to integrated wisdom that draws from multiple sources to create something uniquely suited to our specific circumstances. The philosophy represented in her childish drawing has implications far beyond our individual family, offering a model for navigating the increasingly polarized landscape of parenting information. Later, as the gathering winds down, Julia joins me for a quiet moment away from the crowd. "I've been reflecting on how differently things might have unfolded if you had responded to my exclusion with anger or withdrawal," she admits. "We might have remained trapped in that oppositional dynamic, with Eliza caught between competing approaches rather than benefiting from integrated wisdom. I had my moments of hurt and resentment, I acknowledge honestly, but I kept returning to something Richard used to say, that the true test of wisdom isn't being right, but being effective in creating positive outcomes." Julia nods thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about applying the wisdom circle model to other contexts where knowledge has become unnecessarily polarized. Healthcare decisions, educational approaches, community planning, so many areas suffer from the false dichotomy between expertise and experience." Her observation highlights the broader implications of what began as a personal response to exclusion. By creating structures that honor multiple forms of knowing without establishing rigid hierarchies between them, we had developed an approach that could potentially address division in many contexts beyond parenting. As we help finalize cleanup from the gathering, David shares exciting news that brings our journey to a new threshold. The hospital foundation is considering funding for a dedicated Wisdom Circle Center, he announces, a permanent space for intergenerational family support programs based on the model you and Eleanor developed. They want to meet with you both next week to discuss the possibility. This potential institutional support represents a profound transformation of what began as a personal hurt. The exclusion that once seemed so painful might lead to the creation of something that could support families for generations to come. A legacy far more significant than participation in a single baby shower could ever have provided. Eleanor joins our conversation with characteristic perspective. "You know what makes this story so powerful? It's not that rejection turned into acceptance or that hurt transformed into healing. It's that division evolved into integration, a fundamentally different paradigm rather than just a reversal of positions." Her insight captures exactly what makes the Wisdom Circle approach distinctive. We didn't simply replace Julia's research-only perspective with tradition-dominated alternatives. Instead, we created a new framework that transcended the false dichotomy between these knowledge systems, recognizing that optimal solutions emerge from their thoughtful integration rather than competition. As we drive home, Eliza chattering happily. In the back seat about her new friends from the gathering, I reflect on the extraordinary journey of these 3 years. The painful exclusion from Julia's carefully curated shower has led to the creation of something far more meaningful than I could have imagined in those early moments of hurt. Not just reconciliation within our family, but a model for bridging divisions that has touched dozens of lives beyond our own. When Julia first told me I wasn't welcome at her baby shower, I could have responded in many ways, with angry confrontation, passive-aggressive withdrawal, or bitter resentment. By choosing instead to create something new that demonstrated rather than demanded the value of integrated wisdom, I opened pathways not just to personal healing, but to community transformation. The journey we've begun, the Wisdom Circle, and its continuing evolution, represents a response to exclusion that transcends personal vindication. By throwing a gathering Next door with a twist. I didn't just find an alternative celebration. I helped establish a model for honoring diverse forms of knowledge that continues to create meaningful connections across generational divides. Our story continues to unfold. I'm increasingly convinced that our deepest disappointments sometimes open doorways to possibilities we could never have anticipated. By transforming rejection into creation rather than conflict, I discovered a purpose for my later years more meaningful than any traditional grandmother role could have provided, becoming a bridge builder between knowledge systems that too often remain unnecessarily separated. Only time will tell where this path ultimately leads us. But I'm grateful for the journey, unexpected twists and all. The meeting with the hospital foundation board was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in early spring. Eleanor and I had spent the previous week preparing our presentation, carefully documenting the Wisdom Circle's growth and impact over the past 3 years. We had collected testimonials from participating families, compiled evaluation data from our structured programs, and created a comprehensive proposal for how a dedicated center might expand our reach throughout the region. "This is our opportunity to institutionalize the approach," Eleanor said as we reviewed our materials one final time in her sunroom, "to ensure the Wisdom Circle continues beyond our direct involvement." At 77, I was increasingly aware of the importance of creating sustainable structures for initiatives I cared about. Though still active and engaged, I had experienced enough health challenges in recent months, a bout of pneumonia last winter, increasingly troublesome arthritis, in my hands to recognize that ensuring the Circle's future required more than personal dedication. It needed institutional support and younger leadership willing to carry forward the core principles we had established. The morning of the meeting brought unexpected news. David called just as I was preparing to leave for the hospital. "Mom, are you sitting down?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. "Julia's been in an accident. She's okay, but she's in the emergency room right now." My heart stuttered. "What happened?" "Car accident on her way to work. A delivery truck ran a red light and hit the driver's side of her car. She's conscious and stable, but they're doing scans to check for internal injuries. I'm heading to the hospital now." "I'll meet you there," I said immediately, all thoughts of the foundation meeting vanishing. "What about Eliza?" "She's at preschool. They'll keep her until we know more. I've already called her teacher to explain the situation." "I'll contact Eleanor about the foundation meeting," I assured him. "Don't worry about anything but Julia, right?" "Now." After calling Eleanor, who immediately agreed to handle the presentation alone, I drove directly to Harborview General Hospital, the same institution where I had spent my career and where our Wisdom Circle programs had taken root. The familiar corridors that had once been my professional domain now felt ominous as I made my way to the emergency department. I found David in the waiting area, his face pale with worry. "They're doing a CT scan," he explained. "The doctor said she has a concussion and several lacerations from broken glass, plus significant bruising from the airbag and seatbelt. They're checking for internal bleeding and spinal injuries." "The important thing is that she's conscious and stable," I reminded him, falling back on my decades of nursing experience to provide reassurance. "Modern emergency care is remarkable. She's in good hands here." We settled into the uncomfortable waiting room chairs, David alternately pacing and checking his phone for updates from colleagues who would cover his responsibilities at the research center. I offered silent thanks that my flexible volunteer schedule allowed me to be fully present during this crisis. Another reminder of how life circumstances change our needs across different seasons. After nearly 2 hours, a young doctor emerged to update us. "Mrs. Caldwell is stable and the CT scan shows no internal bleeding," she reported. "She has a moderate concussion, several lacerations that required stitches, and significant bruising to her left side. We want to keep her overnight for observation due to the concussion, but barring any complications, she should be able to go home tomorrow." The relief on David's face was palpable. "Can we see her?" "She's being moved to a room now. A nurse will come get you shortly." When we were finally allowed to see Julia, I was struck by how vulnerable she looked in the hospital bed. Her usual, polished appearance was replaced by bandages on her left temple and forearm, her business attire exchanged for a hospital gown, but her eyes were alert as she greeted us. "This wasn't how I planned to spend my day," she said with a wan smile. "I had 3 client meetings scheduled, which can all be rescheduled," David assured her, gently taking her unbandaged hand. "The important thing is that you're okay." "The car is definitely not okay," she grimaced. "It's probably totaled." "Cars can be replaced," I said simply. "You can't." Julia's eyes met mine with unexpected emotion. "Thank you for coming, Margaret. I know you had that important foundation meeting today." "Family comes first," I replied. "Eleanor is handling the presentation. She knows the material as well as I do." A nurse entered with medication and another set of neurological checks, and our conversation paused. I noticed David watching the nurse's assessment with the keen attention to detail that characterized his research work, mentally cataloging each step of the procedure. "I need to call the preschool," he said once the nurse left. "They'll need to know our pickup plans have changed." "I can get Eliza," I offered immediately. "She can stay with me as long as needed." David and Julia exchanged a look of silent communication before Julia nodded. "That would be incredibly helpful," she acknowledged. "With the concussion, I'm supposed to rest in a quiet environment for several days. Having an energetic 3-year-old around isn't exactly compatible with that prescription." "Eliza and I will be fine," I assured them. "We have our well-established routines from our regular days together." As we discussed logistics, I was struck by how naturally we had fallen into collaborative problem-solving during this crisis. There was no hesitation about whether my caregiving approach was appropriate, no concerns about my traditional methods potentially contradicting their evidence-based parenting. In this moment of genuine need, the artificial divisions that had once separated us dissolved in the face of practical necessity. David left to make arrangements with the preschool and gather some personal items for Julia from their home, while I remained at the hospital. During a quiet moment when Julia was resting, I stepped into the hallway to call Eleanor for an update on the foundation meeting. "It went extremely well," she reported. "The board was particularly impressed with the evaluation data showing improved family functioning across diverse demographic groups. They've approved initial funding for a pilot center, with potential for expanded support based on continued demonstration of outcomes." This news would normally have elated me, representing the culmination of 3 years of dedicated work. But in the context of Julia's accident, it registered as important but secondary to the immediate family concerns. "That's wonderful," I responded. "But I'm afraid my focus needs to be on family matters for the next few days. Julia will need recovery time at home, and I'll be caring for Eliza during that period." "Of course," Eleanor agreed immediately. "Family comes first. This is actually a perfect demonstration of what the Wisdom Circle represents: intergenerational support during life's unexpected challenges." Her observation highlighted an essential truth. The principles we had been promoting through the circles weren't just theoretical frameworks, but practical approaches to navigating real-life complexities. In this moment of family crisis, we were living the very model we had been teaching: flexible adaptation of roles based on changing needs, integration of different knowledge systems to address immediate challenges, practical support across generational lines. When David returned, I left to pick up Eliza from preschool. Her teacher had prepared her with an age-appropriate explanation of the situation, but I could see the worry in her little face as I greeted her. "Is Mommy really hurt?" she asked as I helped her into my car. "Mommy has some OEs that need time to heal," I explained, using the simple language she could understand. "The doctors are helping her, and she needs to rest quietly for a few days. You're going to stay with me while Mommy gets better." "Can I make her pictures to feel better?" Eliza asked, already problem-solving in her own way. "That's a wonderful idea," I affirmed. We can make cards and pictures that won't make noise while she's resting. At my home, I helped Eliza settle into the room I had gradually equipped for her regular visits, a space that balanced her parents' contemporary aesthetic with familiar elements from my own home. Together, we created get-well cards for Julia, prepared dinner, and established the bedtime routine that would structure our days together during this unexpected caregiving period. As I tucked her into bed that night, Eliza asked with the directness characteristic of 3-year-olds, "Grandma, why did the truck hit Mommy's car?" The question caught me off guard, not just the content, but the deeper existential wondering behind it. How do we explain the random unfairness of life to a child? How do we provide security in a world where mothers can leave for work on ordinary mornings and end up in hospital beds by lunchtime? Sometimes accidents happen even when people are being careful, I answered carefully. The important thing is that Mommy is getting good care, and we're all helping her get better. But why did it happen? She persisted, her young mind struggling with concepts of causality and justice. I considered various explanations before settling on one that acknowledged both randomness and resilience. The world has both wonderful surprises and difficult surprises. Sweetheart, we can't always control which ones come our way, but we can control how we help each other when the difficult ones happen. Eliza considered this thoughtfully before nodding. Like how I'm helping by staying with you so Mommy can have quiet. Exactly, I affirmed. And how Daddy is helping by taking care of Mommy, and I'm helping by taking care of you. We're all working together as a family. This seemed to satisfy her, and she soon drifted to sleep, her small hand curled trustingly in mine. As I watched her peaceful face, I reflected on how this unexpected crisis had transcended the careful boundaries and role definitions we had established over the past 3 years. In the days that followed, our family system reorganized itself around Julia's recovery needs. David balanced hospital visits with work responsibilities. I cared for Eliza while maintaining regular updates to Julia about her daughter's activities and emotional state, and our broader community stepped in with practical support. Meals coordinated by Eleanor, transportation assistance from neighbors, flexibility from David's research colleagues. Julia returned home after 2 days in the hospital, still experiencing significant concussion symptoms that required a quiet, low-stimulation environment. The neurologist had prescribed strict cognitive rest, no screens, no reading, no complex thinking tasks, for at least a week, with gradual reintroduction of normal activities based on symptom response. For someone whose identity and self-image were so thoroughly intertwined with intellectual accomplishment, this prescription proved more challenging than the physical recuperation. "I feel completely useless," she admitted during my brief visit to drop off dinner 3 days after the accident. She was reclined on their living room couch, lights dimmed and curtains partially drawn to reduce visual stimulation. "I can't work, can't read, can't even properly parent my own child. Healing is not uselessness," I offered gently. "It's the essential work your body needs to do right now." "That's a very traditional wisdom perspective," she noted, but without the dismissive tone such an observation might once have carried. "Modern productivity culture doesn't value healing as legitimate work. Perhaps that's where traditional wisdom has something valuable to offer modern approaches," I suggested. "Understanding that human bodies have natural cycles of productivity and recovery that can't be optimized beyond certain boundaries." Julia considered this thoughtfully. "The research actually supports that view. Recovery periods enhance overall productivity when properly implemented, but knowing that intellectually doesn't make it easier to accept emotionally." Her candid acknowledgement of the gap between intellectual understanding and emotional acceptance represented significant growth in our relationship. Rather than maintaining a polished facade of evidence-based certainty, she was allowing herself to express vulnerability and internal conflict, precisely the kind of authentic communication the Wisdom Circle sought to facilitate. As Julia's physical recovery progressed, the concussion symptoms persisted longer than initially anticipated. The neurologist explained that brain healing follows its own timeline, often longer for individuals with high cognitive demands in their daily lives. Julia would need to continue limiting screen time, reading, and complex thinking tasks for at least several more weeks, with gradual reintroduction based on symptom response. This extended recovery period created significant challenges for their carefully balanced family system. Julia's high-pressure marketing position required cognitive functions that were temporarily impaired. David's research involved time-sensitive trials that couldn't be rescheduled. Eliza's developmental needs continued regardless of parental capacity. The situation demanded flexibility and support beyond what they had anticipated. 2 weeks after the accident, Julia and David asked if I would be willing to extend my caregiving role, not just watching Eliza during daytime hours, but having her stay with me overnight several days weekly, while David managed Julia's medical appointments and maintained critical work responsibilities. We wouldn't ask if we had other options, David explained, the strain of managing multiple urgent priorities evident in his tired eyes. But the concussion recovery is taking longer than expected, and my research team is at a critical phase. That requires my presence in the lab. Of course I'll help, I assured them without hesitation. Eliza and I have our established routines. We'll be fine for as long as you need. What might once have been perceived as threatening traditional influence was now recognized as essential support during crisis. The boundaries that had seemed so important during Julia's pregnancy, limiting my outdated perspectives to protect their modern parenting approach, became appropriately permeable when real-world challenges demanded practical solutions. This temporary restructuring of our family system created new opportunities for connection across the generations. Eliza's extended stays at my home allowed for natural transmission of family stories, traditional skills, and values-based approaches to daily challenges. Rather than competing with her parents' evidence-based methods, these experiences complemented them, providing different perspectives that enriched her understanding rather than contradicting established frameworks. I was careful to maintain consistent communication with both David and Julia, sharing details of our daily activities, Eliza's developmental progress, and any questions or concerns that arose. This transparency helped ease potential anxieties about my caregiving approach while keeping them connected to their daughter's experiences, despite the physical separation. During this period, Eleanor stepped fully into leadership of the emerging Wisdom Circle Center initiative, keeping me informed but handling the practical implementation details. Focus on your family right now, she insisted when I expressed concern about neglecting our shared project. You're living the very principles we've been teaching, intergenerational support during life transitions. Her perspective helped me recognize that this period wasn't a detour from our Wisdom Circle work, but a deepening of its practical application. The model we had developed wasn't just for scheduled gatherings and structured programs. It provided a framework for navigating real-life challenges across generational lines. My caregiving role during Julia's recovery represented the principles in action rather than a diversion from them. About a month after the accident, as Julia's symptoms began to improve and she started the gradual process of returning to work, she asked if we could have a private conversation during one of my visits to their home. David took Eliza to the park, giving us space to talk without interruption. This experience has changed my perspective, Julia began once we were alone. Before the accident, I saw our different approaches to parenting and family life as inherently contradictory, traditional wisdom versus evidence-based practice. I worried that too much influence from traditional perspectives might undermine the carefully researched approaches we wanted to implement. She adjusted her position carefully, still moving with the deliberate motions of someone managing persistent pain. But these past weeks have shown me something different. When real crisis hit, the rigid boundaries between knowledge systems became irrelevant. What mattered was practical support, flexibility, and integrated wisdom that addressed our specific circumstances. Crisis has a way of clarifying what's truly important, I acknowledged. Theoretical debates fade when immediate needs take precedence. It's more than that, Julia continued thoughtfully. I've realized that evidence-based practice isn't about rejecting traditional wisdom, but about evaluating all available knowledge, including experiential wisdom, against measurable outcomes. The best approaches integrate multiple knowledge sources rather than elevating one at the expense of others. This insight represented exactly the perspective the wisdom circle had been designed to facilitate. Recognition that different knowledge systems could enhance rather than threaten each other when approached with mutual respect. That Julia had arrived at this understanding through personal experience rather than abstract discussion made it all the more meaningful. Your care for Eliza during this period hasn't just been practical help, she continued. It's demonstrated how traditional and contemporary approaches can complement each other. The structured activities based on developmental research that we normally provide are enhanced by the family stories, practical skills, and values-based conversations you naturally incorporate. She reached for her water glass with a slightly shaky hand, a lingering effect of the neurological impact. I've been thinking about the baby shower, she said, surprising me with this reference to the event that had initially sparked our conflict 3 years earlier. My exclusion of you was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how knowledge systems interact. I saw traditional wisdom as threatening to evidence-based approaches rather than potentially complementary. This direct acknowledgement of our original conflict took courage, a willingness to revisit a painful moment with new perspective rather than leaving it safely in the past. It represented significant growth in our relationship, moving from polite accommodation to authentic reflection on the underlying dynamics that had shaped our interactions. We all approach life with the understanding available to us at the time, I offered, choosing not to dwell on past hurt, but to affirm the growth that had occurred since. What matters is our willingness to expand that understanding when new evidence, whether from research or experience, suggests different approaches. Julia smiled at my deliberate use of research terminology. Exactly. Which is why I'd like to propose something that might surprise you. She reached carefully for a folder on the side table, moving with the deliberate motions of someone still managing pain. I've been using some of my enforced rest time to think about the Wisdom Circle's evolution. The hospital foundation has approved initial funding for a pilot center, but sustainable growth will require leadership transition planning. She handed me a document titled Wisdom Circle Center Strategic Development Plan. I'd like to join the leadership team, she explained, to bring my expertise in evidence assessment and program evaluation to complement the experiential wisdom that you and Eleanor have established as the foundation. The proposal outlined a structured approach to documenting and evaluating the Wisdom Circle model, creating replicable protocols that could be implemented in diverse settings while maintaining the core principles of intergenerational knowledge integration. It represented a sophisticated blending of Julia's analytical skills with the community-based approach Eleanor and I had developed. This accident has given me unexpected perspective, Julia continued. I've experienced firsthand how different knowledge systems can complement rather than threaten each other during real-life challenges. I'd like to help develop frameworks that facilitate that integration for other families before crisis forces the issue. This offer represented far more than practical assistance with program development. It signified Julia's full engagement with the principles underlying the Wisdom Circle, not just intellectual acknowledgement, but personal commitment to creating structures that would help other families bridge the gaps between traditional wisdom and contemporary knowledge. I think that's an excellent proposal, I responded, genuinely moved by this unexpected development. Your analytical skills and research background would bring valuable dimensions to the initiative. Julia's relief was visible. I wasn't sure you'd want my involvement, given our history. The Wisdom Circle has always been about integrating different perspectives, I reminded her. Your contribution would exemplify exactly what we've been, trying to facilitate collaboration across different knowledge systems for more comprehensive understanding. The conversation shifted to practical implementation details, how Julia might gradually increase her involvement as her recovery progressed, which aspects of the initiative aligned most closely with her professional expertise, how her participation might be structured to accommodate her existing work responsibilities. Throughout the discussion, I was struck by how naturally we had moved from the careful navigation of potential conflicts to collaborative problem-solving based on shared purpose. That evening, as I prepared dinner in my kitchen with Eliza helping, by arranging cherry tomatoes on a serving plate, I reflected on the extraordinary evolution our relationship had undergone. From Julia's initial rejection of my traditional perspectives to her current proposal for active involvement in the Wisdom Circle leadership, the journey represented transformation on multiple levels. The doorbell interrupted my reflections. David stood on the porch, looking more relaxed than he had in weeks. "I thought I'd join you for dinner," he explained. "If that's okay." Julia's having a good day and felt comfortable being alone for a few hours. Her parents are coming tomorrow to help for a while. Over our meal, David shared more about Julia's improving symptoms and their plans for gradually re-establishing normal family routines as her recovery progressed. "Her neurologist is pleased with her progress," he reported. "The headaches are lessening, and she's able to tolerate more cognitive activity without symptom flares." "That's wonderful news," I responded sincerely. "Recovery from concussion can be a frustratingly nonlinear process." "We've learned that firsthand," David acknowledged. "Did she share her ideas about the Wisdom Circle with you?" "She did. I think her involvement would bring valuable dimensions to the initiative." David nodded thoughtfully. "This experience has changed her perspective in significant ways. She was telling me last night that she's reconsidering some of her fundamental assumptions about knowledge hierarchies, how we determine which information sources are valid and valuable in different contexts. This evolution in Julia's thinking represented exactly what the Wisdom Circle had been designed to facilitate, not replacing one rigid framework with another, but creating space for more integrated approaches to knowledge across different domains. That this shift had emerged from lived experience rather than abstract discussion made it all the more meaningful. "The accident has been incredibly challenging," David continued, "but it's created unexpected openings for growth and connection. Julia mentioned that she's been thinking about her decision to exclude you from the baby shower 3 years ago, how it reflected assumptions about knowledge systems that she now sees differently. We've all evolved in our understanding," I acknowledged, wanting to honor Julia's growth without dwelling on past hurts. "That's the beauty of remaining open to new perspectives throughout life." After dinner, as David prepared to take Eliza home, the first evening in weeks they felt Julia was ready to handle normal family routines, he paused at the door. "Mom, thank you for everything these past weeks, not just the practical help, which has been essential, but the model you've provided of responding to challenges with creative solutions rather than resentment." His acknowledgement touched me deeply, connecting current circumstances to the original transformative choice I'd made 3 years earlier. In both situations, responding to exclusion or crisis with constructive creation rather than reactive negativity had opened pathways to unexpected possibilities. "That's the essence of wisdom," I suggested. "Not perfect knowledge or absence of mistakes, but the capacity to transform challenges into opportunities for growth and connection." As they drove away, Eliza waving enthusiastically from her car seat, I reflected on how our family journey mirrored the broader mission of the Wisdom Circle, creating spaces where different forms of knowing could enhance rather than threaten each other, where intergenerational connections could provide stability during life's inevitable transitions and challenges. The path forward remained uncertain in many respects. Julia's recovery would continue to require adjustments in family routines. The Wisdom Circle Center would face implementation challenges as it moved from concept to institutional reality. My own role would continue evolving as Eliza grew and family needs shifted. Yet beneath these uncertainties lay a fundamental confidence in the framework we had established. Not rigid structures that resisted change, but flexible approaches that could adapt to evolving circumstances while maintaining essential connections across generations. By transforming initial rejection into creative opportunity, we had discovered pathways to integration that served not just our immediate family, but potentially many others navigating similar challenges. As I cleaned the kitchen and prepared for the unusual quiet of an evening alone, I found myself grateful for the journey, unexpected detours and all. The painful exclusion from Julia's baby shower had initiated a process that ultimately created far more meaningful connections than mere attendance at a single event could have provided. The current challenges of Julia's accident, while difficult in immediate terms, were creating new opportunities for growth and collaboration that might otherwise have remained unrealized. Sometimes, I reflected as I settled into my evening routine, life's most valuable opportunities emerge not from our carefully constructed plans, but from our creative responses to unexpected obstacles. The wisdom lies not in avoiding challenges, but in transforming them into pathways for deeper connection and more integrated understanding. 5 years have passed since Julia's accident. As I look around the bustling main hall of the Collins-Thompson Center for Integrated Family Wisdom on its 2nd anniversary, I can hardly believe the journey that brought us here. What began as a personal response to exclusion from a baby shower has evolved into an institution that serves hundreds of families annually and has become a model for intergenerational knowledge integration nationwide. At 79, I find myself in a role I never anticipated, founding mentor emeritus of an approach to family support that transcends the traditional divisions between evidence-based practice and experiential wisdom. The building around me, with its thoughtfully designed spaces for both structured programs and informal gatherings, stands as a physical manifestation of the principles we've developed over these years, creating environments where different forms of knowledge can enhance rather than threaten each other. Today's celebration marks not just the center's 2nd anniversary, but the publication of Bridges Across Knowing, the Wisdom Circle Approach to Integrated Family Support, co-authored by Eleanor, Julia, and myself. The book documents our journey from informal gatherings to structured methodology, providing a framework for other communities seeking to bridge the often adversarial divide between traditional knowledge and contemporary research. Eliza, now 8, and fiercely proud of her role as junior ambassador for the center, weaves confidently through the crowd distributing program booklets. Her auburn hair, so like her father's, is pulled back in a practical ponytail, her movements reflecting the self-assured energy of a child who has grown up surrounded by multiple generations actively engaged in meaningful work together. "Grandma," she calls, spotting me near the refreshment table. "Dr. Chen says we need more chairs in the legacy room for the panel discussion. Can I show the volunteers where to find them?" Her eager competence makes me smile. From her earliest years, Eliza has absorbed the core principles of the center, not through formal instruction, but through lived experience of intergenerational collaboration. She moves comfortably between the research-oriented world of her parents and the tradition-rich environment of her grandparents, integrating elements of both into her unique perspective. "The storage room behind the kitchen has extra chairs," I tell her. "Ask Mr. Wilson to help you. Those chairs are too heavy for you to carry alone." She nods and darts off, pausing briefly to assist an elderly man who seems uncertain about which room to enter for the upcoming presentation. Her natural inclination to bridge generations, offering respect to elders while confidently sharing information, exemplifies exactly the integration we've sought to foster through the center's programs. Julia approaches, elegant in a tailored suit that reflects her recent promotion to Executive Director of Medical Communications at her pharmaceutical company. Her recovery from the accident was gradual but complete, though she still occasionally experiences headaches during periods of intense stress. The experience permanently altered her perspective on knowledge hierarchies and integration, changes that eventually led to her current leadership role at the center. The registration numbers are remarkable, she notes, referencing the tablet in her hand. Over 300 participants for today's sessions, with representatives from 17 different community organizations interested in implementing the model. That's wonderful, I respond. Eleanor will be particularly pleased about the community organizations. She's always emphasized the importance of adapting the approach for diverse settings. Julia nods in agreement. The adaptability is what makes the model sustainable. It's not a rigid program to be replicated exactly, but a flexible framework that can be tailored to different community needs while maintaining core principles. This emphasis on adaptable frameworks rather than prescribed procedures represents Julia's significant contribution to the center's development. Her analytical mind, once focused on establishing definitive, evidence-based approaches, now excels at creating structures that accommodate multiple knowledge sources while maintaining methodological integrity. "How are you feeling about the panel discussion?" she asks. "It's not too late to adjust the format if you're concerned about the length. The afternoon program includes a panel featuring 4 generations of perspective, Eleanor representing the founding generation, myself representing experienced practitioners, Julia representing mid-career professionals integrating multiple knowledge systems, and several young parents who have participated in center programs. The format deliberately embodies the intergenerational collaboration we advocate." "The format is perfect," I assure her. Multiple voices represented in conversation rather than sequential presentations. It demonstrates the very integration we're discussing. Julia smiles, recognizing her own influence in this approach. "Integration rather than alternation," she agrees. That distinction has proven so valuable across contexts. Her observation highlights one of the key insights that emerged through our work together: the difference between truly integrating knowledge systems and merely alternating between them. True integration creates new understanding that transcends the limitations of individual knowledge frameworks, while alternation maintains separation, even while acknowledging multiple sources. The development of this more sophisticated understanding reflects the evolution of our approach over the past 5 years. What began as a reactive response to perceived division has matured into a proactive framework for knowledge integration that addresses challenges across multiple domains. David joins us, having just finished setting up the audiovisual equipment for the documentary screening scheduled for later in the afternoon. The short film, produced by a local university's communications department, documents the center's development from informal gathering to institutional presence, highlighting the core principles that guide our approach to intergenerational knowledge. Sharing. "Everything's ready in the Harmony Room," he reports. "The tech team did a final sound check and the acoustics are perfect." His involvement with the center has grown alongside his professional advancement at Meridian Pharmaceuticals, where he recently became Director of Research Integration, a position created specifically to facilitate collaboration between traditional laboratory research and emerging patient-centered methodologies. The skills he's developed through the Wisdom Circle work have proven directly applicable to bridging similar divides in scientific research contexts. "Your mother would be so proud to see this," I tell him, gesturing to the activity throughout. The center. She always believed in the value of practical wisdom grounded in both experience and evidence. David's mother, Richard's first wife, had passed away when David was just 12, leaving an absence that shaped his early understanding of family in profound ways. Though rarely discussed openly, her influence remained present in David's commitment to creating meaningful family connections for Eliza. "I've been thinking about her today," he acknowledges. "And about Dad. They both valued integration over division, though they expressed it differently. This center embodies principles they would have strongly supported." His reference to Richard touches me deeply. Though my late husband never saw the Wisdom Circle's development, his influence permeates its foundational philosophy. His lifelong commitment to bridging practical application with theoretical understanding informs every aspect of our approach. As we continue preparing for the afternoon's events, I reflect on the remarkable journey that brought us to this moment. The transformative turning points that shaped our path remain vivid in my memory. Moments when choices to create rather than confront, to bridge rather than divide, opened unexpected possibilities for growth and connection. The initial exclusion, from Julia's baby shower, painful as it was at the time, created the opening for Eleanor and me to develop the wisdom circle concept. That first gathering in Eleanor's sunroom established principles that continue to guide our approach, creating spaces where different forms of knowing can enhance rather than threaten each other, where intergenerational connections provide stability during life's inevitable transitions. Julia's accident 3 years later accelerated the integration process, moving theoretical understanding into lived experience as our family navigated unexpected crisis together. The boundaries that had seemed so important during her pregnancy, limiting my outdated perspectives to protect their modern parenting approach, dissolved when practical challenges demanded flexible solutions across generational lines. Julia's subsequent proposal to join the leadership team, bringing her analytical skills and research background to complement our experiential approach, marked another pivotal moment in the center's development. Her involvement transformed the initiative from a community-based program into an evidence-informed model with documented methodology and measurable outcomes, changes that ultimately enabled institutional support and broader implementation. The Hospital Foundation's initial funding for a pilot center grew into substantial investment, as evaluation data demonstrated significant positive impacts on family functioning across diverse demographic groups. Julia's expertise in program assessment proved crucial during this phase, as she developed methodologies that captured both quantifiable outcomes and qualitative experiences in ways that satisfied multiple stakeholders. Construction of the dedicated facility began 3 years ago, supported by a combination of institutional funding, community donations, and a significant grant from a national foundation focused on innovative approaches to family support. The design process itself embodied our integrated approach, with architects collaborating closely with program participants of all ages to create spaces that facilitated both structured learning and organic intergenerational connection. The resulting building, named the Collins Thompson Center in recognition of Eleanor's and my founding roles, opened 2 years ago with expanded programming that reached far beyond our original conception. What began as an alternative to a traditional baby shower had evolved into a comprehensive family support center with multiple components. The original Wisdom Circle format continues with weekly gatherings that create space for intergenerational exchange around specific family challenges. These circles maintain the core principle of integrating research-based information with experiential wisdom in non-hierarchical conversations, while incorporating structured facilitation methods developed through our collective experience. More comprehensive Wisdom Circle curriculum now offers a 16-week series for families at various transitional stages: expecting first children, integrating siblings, navigating adolescence, supporting aging parents. Each module deliberately integrates current research with practical wisdom from experienced families, creating frameworks that participants can adapt to their specific circumstances. The intergenerational mentoring program has expanded to include both family-to-family partnerships and specialized connections around specific challenges. Unlike traditional mentoring programs that often impose hierarchical relationships, this structured approach emphasizes mutual learning across generations, with clear boundaries and ongoing support. Professional integration programs provide continuing education for healthcare providers, educators, and social service professionals seeking to incorporate intergenerational wisdom into evidence-based practice. These sessions, often co-facilitated by professionals and community members, bridge institutional expertise with lived experience in ways that enhance service delivery across contexts. Community education workshops based on Wisdom Circle principles are offered in diverse settings: healthcare facilities, schools, religious organizations, and workplace environments. These adaptable modules help participants develop skills for evaluating diverse information sources without defaulting to either newest is best or tradition is always right perspectives. Research and documentation initiatives preserve valuable, traditional practices while subjecting them to appropriate evaluation, creating accessible resources that help families make informed choices without becoming overwhelmed by conflicting advice. This carefully balanced approach maintains respect for cultural wisdom while acknowledging the importance of safety and effectiveness. As I survey the bustling center preparing for today's anniversary celebration, I'm struck by how thoroughly the physical environment embodies our integrated philosophy. Traditional elements, comfortable gathering spaces, practical kitchen facilities for intergenerational cooking activities, garden areas that facilitate natural mentoring, exist alongside contemporary features like technology-enabled research, stations, professional-grade recording facilities for documenting oral histories, and flexible spaces that adapt to diverse program needs. Even the aesthetic choices reflect integration rather than division. Warm, natural materials that create sensory connection to tradition, combined with clean lines and adaptable configurations that serve contemporary functional requirements. Nothing is purely nostalgic or aggressively modern. Instead, thoughtful integration creates spaces that welcome multiple generations while serving practical program needs. The approach has proven particularly valuable in bridging cultural differences in family support. Immigrant families find validation for traditional practices while gaining access to current resources. Multi-generational American families discover ways to honor heritage while incorporating contemporary insights. By creating space for multiple knowledge systems rather than establishing hierarchies between them, the center helps reduce conflict while preserving valuable cultural wisdom. Eleanor joins us, moving more slowly these days at 86, but still, mentally sharp and deeply engaged with the center's ongoing development. Her sociological perspective has been instrumental in documenting the model's theoretical underpinnings and ensuring that implementation maintains fidelity to core principles, while adapting to diverse contexts. The documentary crew wants to record brief reflections from the three of us before the formal program begins, she informs us. Individual statements about the journey from concept to center. As we make our way to the recording area set up in a quiet corner of the building, Eliza intercepts us with an update about the seating arrangements. We've added 30 more chairs to the legacy room, she reports. And Mrs. Ramirez from the university is here with her students. They're setting up the research poster display in the Innovation Gallery. Eleanor thanks her with the same respectful attention she would offer an adult colleague, another example of the intergenerational respect that characterizes all center interactions. This consistent modeling has shaped Eliza's understanding of her own role in community contexts, helping her develop confidence without entitlement, respect without subservience. The documentary interview takes place in a comfortable seating area, deliberately designed to facilitate conversation across generations. The young filmmaker asks us to reflect on the journey from initial concept to established center, particularly focusing on key insights that emerged through the process. Eleanor speaks first, her academic background evident in her structured response. The false dichotomy between traditional wisdom and evidence-based practice has created unnecessary division in family support systems, she observes. Our approach demonstrates that integration produces more effective outcomes than either knowledge system alone can provide. The key insight was recognizing that different forms of knowing serve complementary rather than competing functions. When my turn comes, I focus on the personal transformation that parallel the program's development. What began as a response to personal exclusion evolved into something far more meaningful than I initially imagined, I share. By choosing to create rather than confront, to build bridges rather than defend territory, we opened pathways not just to family reconciliation but to community transformation. The personal and programmatic journeys reinforced each other at every stage. Julia's reflection reveals how profoundly her perspective has evolved over the years. As someone initially committed to purely evidence-based approaches, I've discovered That the most effective family support integrates multiple knowledge systems within appropriate evaluative frameworks, she explains. Research findings without experiential context lack practical application. Traditional practices without evidence assessment may perpetuate ineffective or harmful approaches. Integration creates more comprehensive understanding than either perspective alone could provide. Her articulation of this balanced perspective, valuing both research rigor and experiential wisdom within appropriate contexts, represents extraordinary growth from her initial rejection of traditional knowledge during pregnancy. The journey from exclusion to integration hasn't been merely theoretical for our family, but deeply personal, transforming relationships alongside methodologies. After completing the interviews, we move toward the legacy room for the panel discussion that will formally open the anniversary celebration. The large gathering space quickly fills with participants representing multiple generations, professional backgrounds, and cultural traditions, exactly the diverse community the center was designed to serve. David introduces the panel with a brief overview of the center's development, acknowledging the various contributors to its evolution, while emphasizing the collaborative nature of the process. What makes this approach distinctive, he notes, is its rejection of false choices between traditional and contemporary knowledge. Instead, we've developed frameworks for thoughtful integration that respect diverse ways of knowing while maintaining appropriate evaluation of outcomes. The panel discussion unfolds as a genuine conversation rather than a series of presentations, with perspectives from different generations complementing rather than competing with each other. Eleanor provides historical context about the evolution of family support systems. I share practical insights from implementing intergenerational programs. Julia offers methodological perspectives on evaluating integrated approaches. Younger participants describe how the center's programs have influenced their family practices. Throughout the discussion, I'm struck by how thoroughly the principles we advocate have become embodied in our communication patterns. No single voice dominates. Different perspectives receive respectful attention. Integration rather than competition characterizes the exchange. The medium truly embodies the message in ways that written or presented materials alone could not achieve. As the formal program concludes and participants move toward the reception area, Eliza approaches with a small gift bag decorated with her distinctive artwork. "I made something for today," she tells me somewhat shyly, "to say thank you for starting everything." Inside the bag is a carefully crafted scrapbook documenting the center's development through a child's eyes. Photographs of early gatherings in Eleanor's sunroom, drawings of significant moments in our family's journey, pressed flowers from the garden where many intergenerational activities take place, all arranged with the meticulous attention of a child determined to preserve important memories. "This is beautiful," I tell her, genuinely moved by her effort to document our shared journey. "You've captured exactly what makes the center special, the connections between people across generations." Eliza beams at this acknowledgement. "Mom says our family story is part of the center's story," she explains. "How it all started because you did something creative instead of getting mad when you couldn't come to the baby shower." Her innocent summary captures the essence of the transformation that has occurred over these years. How a painful exclusion became the catalyst for creating something far more meaningful than attendance at a single event could have provided. By responding with creative bridge building rather than resentful withdrawal, I opened pathways not just to family reconciliation, but to community transformation. That's an important part of wisdom, I tell her, choosing words appropriate for her 8-year-old understanding, finding ways to build something positive even when difficult things happen. As the celebration continues around us, with graduates of various center programs sharing stories of how the integrated approach has influenced their family relationships, I reflect on the extraordinary journey that brought us to this moment. The painful phone call from Julia excluding me from her baby shower, an event that seemed so important at the time, now appears as merely the opening chapter in a far more significant story of transformation and growth. The legacy that has emerged from that initial hurt transcends personal vindication or family reconciliation, though both have occurred along the way. By transforming rejection into creation, exclusion into integration, we've established approaches that serve hundreds of families beyond our own immediate circle, creating ripples of positive impact that continue to expand in ways I never could have anticipated. Julia joins us, having completed her responsibilities with the panel discussion. "Your scrapbook is a hit with the documentary team," she tells Eliza with evident pride. "They'd like to include some of your artwork in the final film if that's okay with you." Eliza considers this opportunity with characteristic thoughtfulness, before nodding agreement. As long as they explain that it shows everybody working together, not just one kind of knowing being the best. Her articulation of this core principle, integration rather than hierarchy among knowledge systems, demonstrates how thoroughly she has absorbed the center's fundamental philosophy, not through formal instruction but through lived experience, of adults modeling collaborative approaches across generational lines. "That's exactly what they want to highlight," Julia assures her, "how different kinds of knowing work better together than separately." As Eliza runs off to share this news with her father, Julia turns to me with the reflective expression that has become more characteristic since her accident 5 years ago. "I've been thinking about how differently things might have unfolded if you had responded to my exclusion with anger or confrontation," she admits. "We might have remained trapped in opposing positions rather than discovering this integrated approach that serves us all better." "We all made choices that shaped this journey," I acknowledge. Your willingness to reconsider initial perspectives after the accident, David's consistent bridge building between our different approaches, Eleanor's theoretical frameworks that helped us understand what we were experiencing. Everyone contributed to the integration that emerged. Julia nods thoughtfully. "Still, it began with your choice to create rather than confront. That established a pattern that influenced everything that followed." Her recognition of this foundational choice touches me deeply. The decision to respond to exclusion by organizing the first wisdom circle, rather than either accepting marginalization or demanding inclusion, had indeed established patterns that continued to influence our family and community relationships through subsequent challenges and opportunities. As the anniversary celebration continues around us, with participants of all ages engaged in the very intergenerational exchanges the center was designed to facilitate, I feel profound gratitude for the journey that brought us here, unexpected detours and all. The path from exclusion to integration hasn't been straightforward or without challenges, but each difficulty ultimately opened new possibilities for growth and connection. David approaches with Dr. Chen, who has become the medical director for the center's professional integration programs. "We've been discussing expanding the healthcare provider training to include more systematic documentation of traditional healing practices," he explains. "Creating evaluation frameworks that respect cultural wisdom while maintaining appropriate safety standards." This ongoing evolution represents exactly what we hoped the center would facilitate: continuing development of approaches that honor diverse knowledge systems while ensuring beneficial outcomes for families. Rather than becoming rigid in our methodology or protective of established programs, we've maintained the flexibility and openness to growth that characterized our initial response to challenge. As the event begins winding down, Eleanor gathers our core leadership team for a quiet moment of acknowledgement away from the public celebration. "We've created something remarkable here," she observes, her sociologist's perspective evident in her assessment. "Not just a building or programs, but a framework for bridging divides that extend far beyond family support." She's right, I realize. The approach we've developed, creating structured spaces where different forms of knowing can enhance rather than threaten each other, where intergenerational connections provide stability during life's inevitable transitions, has applications across multiple domains. The principles of thoughtful integration rather than forced choice between traditional and contemporary knowledge systems can address divisions in healthcare, education, community development, and countless other contexts. As we prepare to rejoin the public gathering, I take a final moment to appreciate the extraordinary journey from exclusion to integration that has shaped these years. When Julia first told me I wasn't welcome at her baby shower, I could never have imagined the transformative path that would emerge from that painful moment. By choosing to create something new rather than fight for inclusion in something old, I opened doorways to possibilities far more meaningful than I initially envisioned. The wisdom circle approach, now embodied in both methodology and physical space, represents a legacy that will continue evolving long after all of us have passed from the scene. As we move back into the celebration, Eliza rushes up with news that the city mayor has arrived and wants to present a proclamation recognizing the center's contribution to community well-being. This institutional acknowledgement of our work represents another milestone in the journey from personal response to public impact, evidence that the principles developed through our family's experience have relevance far beyond our individual circumstances. Looking around at the diverse gathering, young parents seeking practical guidance, professionals exploring integrated methodologies, elders sharing accumulated wisdom, children absorbing models of intergenerational respect, I feel profound gratitude for the unexpected journey that transformed personal hurt into community healing. By throwing a gathering next door with a twist, rather than fighting for inclusion in an event that excluded me, I helped establish pathways to integration that continue to create meaningful connections across previously divided domains. Sometimes, our deepest disappointments truly do open doorways to possibilities we could never have anticipated. By transforming rejection into creation rather than conflict, I discovered not just a way through personal hurt, but a framework for bridging divisions that serves far beyond our immediate family circumstances. That legacy, the wisdom circle, and its continuing evolution, represents a response to exclusion that transcends personal vindication, creating ongoing opportunities for integration across generations and knowledge systems for years to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.